we begin with breaking news from Syria. President Bashar al-Assad has reportedly fled the capital Damascus to an unknown destination after rebel forces entered the city, meeting little resistance. The insurgents have declared the city free from Assad's rule that lasted for decades, less than 2 weeks after launching their lightning offensive. Citing senior military officials, Reuters reports that the Syrian Army Command has notified its officers of the fall of the regime. Syria's Prime Minister Mohammed Jal-ali has announced he is ready to cooperate in a peaceful transfer of power with any new leadership chosen by the people. Now let's bring in journalist Ossama Muhammad. He is in Qamishli, a city in northeastern Syria. Now, what happened during these last decisive hours? Give us an update.
Thank you for having me again. As I mentioned yesterday, things are moving very quickly and fastly. Today is almost a national day for all the Syrian people. Syrian regime have been collapsed and fall in every city, from east to west, from north to and to south. Mosques are calling. I don't know if you hear the mosques or not. Everybody is celebrating. After the decades of fighting and of conflict in the region, people now think that there is a good chance to have a peace after the falling of regime. Damascus have fallen. The home city have fallen yesterday too. Reports mention that Bashar al-Assad already left to Iran. Some others say he is in the small pocket, whereas he have his one tribe and allies, which is like the Alawis, with some people from Hezbollah. The airports already fallen down. All the air plans have been cancelled. So we could say that regime physically and theoretically has fallen in Syria.
Okay, the regime has fallen. So who's in control now?
However, now there is two main people or two main parties who are controlling Syria. SDF, like Syrian Democratic Forces, who are supported by the international community and the US and the coalition, are controlling 40% from Syria in northeast Syria. And all the other parts are controlled by the HTC and some radical some radical forces alongside with the Free Syrian Army in Daraa. There is kind of reports that there are going to be negotiations, there are going to be talks between the both sides to establish or to talk and formate a new committee which going to talk about the political process in Syria.
How likely is it that they form, let's say, a government of national unity?
This is going to be related to the regional countries too. Turkey will not like the Kurds to participate in any talks or any political solutions for Syria. However, the other Syrians, I think they're going to prefer to have a solution for every ethnic, for every religious and every group who are living inside Syria. HTC leader, Jal-ali yesterday mentioned in his statement too that we gonna not have any punishment for any people who were allies with the regime. So I think it's a time for a political process, for a deal which gonna save the lives of all the people in Syria after all of this dramatical years of killing, of conflict. However, I think there is a chance for ISIS to appear again during all of this mess. But the international coalition yesterday mentioned too that they're gonna support SDF and they're fighting against ISIS, and there's gonna be no chance for ISIS to take control or take over any region in the middle of Syria. We talk about Palmyra and Bad.
Now, which of these groups do you think will dominate the coming days and weeks, the talks that are going to happen?
Well, I think mostly they're going to be HTC, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, let's say, and Jabhat Nusra and the Syrian National Army. Beside, that there is Free Syrian Army who was controlling from Daraa since 3 days ago, and now they are in Damascus, alongside with SDF, which is like mostly consist of the Arabs, and the Kurds are leading this forces too. So I think the committee will be established by, as I mentioned, the international community, and I don't think they're gonna be chance to leave the Kurds outside of this table, because if this is gonna happen again, there's gonna be another fighting in Syria, which nobody want to have new fighting happening in Syria after all of these years.
Now, Assad was supported by minorities in Syria, like the Christians, the Alawite Muslims, and Druze. You touched upon this earlier, but what can these groups expect now?
That's a good question. As I mentioned to you, there is a lot of the villages of the Alawis, of the people of Druze have been fallen in the hand of the HTC and the Free Syrian Army and National Syrian Army. But according to reports that there was no any killing, there was no any torturing, there was no any arresting or detaining of these people. As I mentioned to you too, the Syrian National Army now, it look like they are trained well. They have been proved. And they have been supported by some of the international NGOs that how to deal with the how to deal with the minorities and other ethnicities. So I think they're gonna be peace. They're gonna not be any punishment by the Free Syrian Army or even by these radical groups for the minorities or other ethnicities in Syria now.
You talked about the Free National Army, but let's talk about the regime's army. Why did they stop fighting the rebels?
That's a good question too. There was some videos yesterday that a lot of the fighters from Syrian regime soldiers left their weapons. I shared some videos with you too, that they changed their uniforms and went their homes too. There was some other videos too by some soldiers where they were talking openly and publicly in homes that the regime have put us in the trip, like they left us alone. They were just claims that the regime will gonna support us, which gonna protect us. But all of this was fake. Now we are left alone for our destiny. So these people already left regime, and now they knew that there is gonna be no regime for Syria. There's gonna be no Ba'ath regime controlling Syria, and they are somehow, they are somehow having a trust that Free Syrian Army will not punish them or not kill them if they surrender themselves.
Now, Assad used to have very powerful allies, Russia and Iran. Why did they not intervene on his behalf?
The regional conflict have been happening in the region was one of the main reasons that the Free Syrian Army can't control the cities quickly and very easily. According to the interview with Jal-ali too, that he mentioned that the bombing and the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah was one of the main objectives that helped the Free Syrian Army to control and take over the regime areas, because this was giving HTC and Free Syrian Army a good chance after Hezbollah was falling down in Lebanon. However, for the Russians, as you know, the Russians are really busy with the Ukrainian and with the war there. They mentioned in the reports too that the Syrian regime soldiers are not fighting. Then why we gonna support them? I think there is kind of deal between the Russians, the Iranians, Turkey, and the Arab countries to remove Assad from the power.
Now, briefly, if you can, after 13 years of bloody civil war, the general population, are they more relieved that it's finally over, or are they afraid of the future?
Thank you. As I mentioned to you, I think today gonna be 8th of December, gonna be the national day for all the Syrian people. As I mentioned to you, mosques in every city, including the Kurdish city, like Kamishli now, the mosques are calling for freedom, calling for the peace. People are hoping that there gonna be no regime, there gonna be no any more fighting. Statues of Hafez al-Assad, the father of Assad, and Bashar al-Assad have been fallen down in Kamishli today by the Kurdish people. The people in Damascus, in Homs, in every city, now hope there gonna be no more fighting. Today we hope that there gonna be a new formation for a future which gonna save the rights of all the ethnics, religious and bounds of all the Syrian people, inshallah.
The journalist Ossama Muhammad there in Kamishli. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
So who are these anti-government forces in Syria and what do they want? Rebel groups in Syria are various and diverse, but this lightning offensive was spearheaded by a group called HTS. It's made up of jihadist fighters and is designated a terrorist organization by the UN, the US, Turkey and other countries.
Syrian rebels are celebrating after entering Aleppo, the country's second largest city. Their offensive took the world by surprise, even though some reports suggest they had been planning the new push against the Assad regime for a while. The insurgents are led by jihadist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Known by their initials HTS, they are the most powerful rebel faction in Syria and are made up of some 30 armed groups and at least 60,000 well-trained fighters. They govern Idlib province, an area of at least 3 million people in the northwest, which is part of the around 30% of Syrian territory not controlled by President Bashar al-Assad. HTS was founded by Islamist rebel Abu Muhammad al-Golani. It emerged from a group known as Al-Nusra Front that he set up in 2011 in the early stages of Syria's war. Back then, under Golani's leadership, they were a direct affiliate of al-Qaeda, but reportedly broke ranks with the group in 2017 to become the new organisation, now known as HTS. They've long been designated a terrorist organisation by the UN and the US. They've also been accused of human rights abuses in areas they control, including executions and persecution of religious minorities and women. Although more recently, they claim to have disavowed terrorism and are trying to present a more moderate face.
And to discuss this further, I'm now joined by Rodger Shanahan. He's a Middle East analyst and a former army officer, served with the UN in South Lebanon and in Syria. He's joining us from Sydney this morning. Rodger, the Syrian army command says Assad's regime is over. How surprising is this for you?
Well, certainly very surprising for myself, also most commentators and regional countries as well. The speed with which the Assad regime fell in essentially 10 or 11 days from the time that the rebel push started is extraordinary. Most people expected a much bigger fight to be put up and this to be a bloody campaign, but it turned out to be quite the opposite.
Now, why did the army not fight the rebels, apparently? Was Assad's military backing maybe not as strong enough as we all thought?
Well, there's probably several reasons for this. The HTS-led coalition, who are the opposition, had spent months in preparation and also training for this. They're far better equipped than they have been in the past. So they're essentially a semi-conventional army at the moment. And they were up against the Assad military forces, who had been hollowed out over the years, a largely conscript army. And there's probably two elements here. First of all, it's a contest of wills, and essentially the Assad military forces were not willing to fight and die for their cause, whereas the opposition were. And the other aspect is, very early on, the opposition gained momentum, and in military terms, once you gain momentum and exploit that momentum, it's very difficult to stop it, and that's what we saw.
Was there a decisive moment, and if so, what was it?
Well, listen, everything is clear in retrospect, and I think if we look back, we'll probably say very early on, the fall of Aleppo, not just its fall, but the speed with which it fell, was a real indicator that either the Assad regime was not willing to expend the resources to stay and fight, or its military was incapable of staying and fighting. And once it fell so quickly, that allowed the opposition to build up momentum and to be so rapid in their advances that the Assad regime was unable to make decisions quickly enough to stop them. And it also meant that its external backers in Russia and Iran weren't able to react quickly enough, and probably, given the lack of fight in the Syrian military, decided that they wouldn't react in the end.
Is that the reason? That leads straight to my next question. Assad had powerful backers with Russia and Iran. Was the speed of the rebel advance decisive, that Russia and Iran decided not to help, or were they just busy on other fronts?
Well, it's a combination of several issues. I suppose, obviously, Russia has its focus entirely on Ukraine. It's only got its forces in Syria, and its ability to reinforce those were limited. Also, the speed with which events unfolded. It takes a while to react. Your support forces to travel to Syria, and the speed with which the Syrian forces were collapsing. You would imagine both in Tehran and in Moscow, rational voices said that the speed with which the regime was collapsing was unlikely that their forces could stop that. And so there was little point in throwing good money after bad, for want of a better term.
Now, militarily, Damascus has now fallen. What do you expect to happen next?
Well, one of the things we've seen with the opposition is they're not while they're full of a diverse range of actors, they're not a ragtag organisation, and they have a civil administrative element that's supposed to follow quickly behind the armed elements, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. They're trying to calm the population. Their use of social media has been very professional in terms of spreading a message that of calm, and they've been quite careful in engaging with the rump Syrian government to make sure that the functions of state in terms of the infrastructure provided to the population continues. The last thing that the opposition group wants is to inherit a broken system. So if they can keep it going as functionally as possible for as long as possible, that makes the transition much smoother, and it gives the population more confidence in the opposition. So I think that's what we're seeing, the early days of what we're seeing at the moment.
Final question, briefly, if you can. Where is Bashar al-Assad?
Very good question. It's a $64,000 question. Nobody quite knows. It might well be that, given the speed of events, he's in some interim location where somebody's giving a short-term asylum until a longer-term solution can be sorted out, and perhaps where he's in for a short term doesn't want that publicly known at the moment. So the short answer is I don't think anybody knows publicly.
The Middle East analyst Rodger Shanahan there. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure.